I'd like to welcome everyone to this CI Compass webinar. We're very excited to have Shawna and Martin here. So CI Compass is an NSF-funded project to provide cyber infrastructure and data management support NSF major facilities, and specifically in the research community more broadly. And these webinar series are a great way for us to present topics and facilitate discussion and cross-pollinate ideas on cyber infrastructure. So today, I'm pleased to introduce Shawna Sadler and Martin Halbert, who are going to be presenting on the new data management changes for coming with the Nelson Memo. So Shawna Sadler is the head of outreach and partnerships at ORCID. She works with agencies and institutions worldwide on identifier adoption and policies, and she's previously held positions in digital libraries and technology at Deakin University and at University of Calgary. And our other presenter, Martin Halbert, is the science advisor. I'm going to probably get this wrong. Is the science advisor for public access in the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. That's in the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate of the National Science Foundation. He's also overseeing these new and ongoing FAIR OS research coordination networks, which is fantastic in this area. And before the NSF, he was the dean of libraries at UNC Greensboro and also at the University of North Texas. So with that said, I'd like to let them go. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Don. I think I'm up first, and Shawna will follow me. I'm delighted to have a chance to address the CI Compass community. I think the way we're going to do this is I'm going to frame the Nelson Memorandum more generally with the context of it, and then we'll go to a discussion of persistent identifiers with Shawna. And let me see if I can share my slides. Delighted to have a chance to chat with you here today. In this brief conversation, I'm going to go through four things, just a very quick recap to ground us all in this topic. Many of you will be very familiar with this arc of recent developments in public access, but I'm going to try to level set here. So give everybody a quick history of the federal public access policies developments over the last 10 years or so, the principles and opportunities that are arising from these new public access requirements, the new plan development approaches and things that are coming out of it. And finally, just put out a general invitation to the community. We would love to hear from you as researchers in the field that will be affected by all of these new requirements as we move from planning to policy implementation and in subsequent years. So, of course, many of you will be familiar with the 2013 White House memorandum from the Office of Science and Technology Policy under then OSTP Director John P. Holdren that directed agencies to develop public access plans to make especially peer-reviewed publications and digital data available. Notably, a couple things to remark on this memorandum is that it was really the first expression by the federal government of a commitment to see directly that publicly funded research outputs would be made publicly accessible. Notably, it did impose a one-year embargo of peer-reviewed articles after their publication date, as sort of as we were moving into this area, and as the OSTP was directing agencies to respond in this way. This was seen as a good compromise at that time. It did get a lot of commentary, people asking, well, why is this one-year embargo in place and that sort of thing. A lot of thoughts on that led to this more recent memorandum. But at NSF, the response took the form under then director of the NSF, France Cordova, of our public access plan in 2015. And it it basically implemented all of the stipulations, requirements of the Holdren memorandum, and basically put in place through reporting mechanisms a requirement that researchers disseminate copies of their articles with a 1-year embargo through the NSF, the then new NSF Public Access Repository, or PAR. And notably, authors could satisfy this requirement either through an AAM, an author accepted manuscript, in other words, the last accepted version of the manuscript after all the peer review changes and so forth had been done, or the version of record, VOR, the actual printed form of the publication, if the journal allowed that, or if you paid the extra cost of that to satisfy this public access requirement. Now, zoom forward to 2022, last year, in response to many discussions over the years about the memorandum under Dr. Holdren, then acting director Alondra Nelson implemented this new memorandum with new guidance to agencies that called for free, immediate, and equitable public access to scientific outputs. And it did respond to a lot of critiques of that embargo period by moving to a 0 embargo requirement for federal agencies of the peer-reviewed articles and the data that underlie those articles specifically. So not all data, but the data that specifically undergirded in individual published articles. Now, let me delve into this a little bit. What is this new policy guidance? The memorandum is very dense. As I've mentioned, it was informed by years of feedback to OSTP from a variety of groups, as coordinated by a national group called the Subcommittee on Open Science, which has representation from a lot of agencies. It did remove this 12-month publication embargo, and that's probably the most controversial aspect of the memorandum that you may have heard about. But it also had guidance on things like, that the really had not been, many people felt, fully realized as a result of the Holdren memorandum around, well, what about the data, and the data that undergirded publications. It really put out a lot of significantly stronger guidance about sharing the data that undergirded publications as well. It had a lot of attention around addressing issues of equitable access to information. And this is something that we at NSF are very focused on, very concerned with, and thinking a lot about. And I'm particularly interested in thoughts that you may have on many aspects of the memorandum and its responses in terms of its equitable aspects. Finally, supporting research and scientific integrity and implementation mechanisms that are in Section 5 of the memorandum via the Subcommittee on Open Science and mechanisms of coordination between different agencies. So just a couple of words on what the new policy guidance is not. It's not an endorsement or a mandate for completely open access or any other particular publication model. It's not a mandate also for APCs, author processing charges, article processing charges, or any other particular publication model, gold or otherwise. It's not a replacement by any means of all the provisions of the 2013 memorandum. In fact, it explicitly says that where it's silent on things, all of the things that were in the 2013 memorandum are still in place. And it's also not a requirement to share or disseminate protected information and data, information that has personally identifiable information within it, or national security secrets or anything of the like. It does represent a lot of new opportunities and priorities. Most people generally agree that it's intended to have the effect of accelerating discovery and amplifying its impact. Promoting scientific integrity through things like reproducibility, fair data guiding principles, and other aspects of open science. And finally, it does have this significant focus on ensuring equity within the scientific community. And we're very much at pains to think about those issues. It's important, we think, to realize all the things that have been realized by the Holdren Memorandum. Millions of articles are now accessible and are accessed on a daily basis as a result of that, of the moves of that memorandum. And we're eager among agencies to go forward with this memorandum. At NSF, just a little window into our planning effort. We had a whole range of planning subgroups that have worked very intensively over the last 6 months to prepare our 2.0 plan, building on longstanding NSF policies and practices. I think you'll see when this thing finally is released in a few months to the public, when we're able to release it, that it really builds on existing NSF practices and expectations. Just a word about the timeline. In general, it's fairly easy to remember this. The plans come out in 23. The policies will be published and they'll be developed over the next year, but published sometime in 2024, and they'll go into effect in 2025. So there are a couple of years yet that we are going to be working on implementation of all of this, these new policies. So we've done a lot of external engagements on this at NSF. We've heard a lot from our different communities we serve, that how publishing is really critical to the research ecosystem and both advances science and supports specific communities. So we're thinking very carefully in every way that we can to not harm publishing communities and practices, although we're sure we'll have some effects on them, certainly. Researchers should have, everybody thinks, an equitable ability and right to submit research results for publication in getting the word out on what they've accomplished. The cross-disciplinary value to science of shared data is really something that we think should be maximized. We're thinking about that, but also we're sensitive to practices that are under, in regular parlance for scientific data sharing. And finally, we don't want to impose any duplicative effort and any unnecessary researcher burden. So we're very sensitive to thinking about those things. Communities, we're very aware, want to help develop new mechanisms and ecosystems for sharing research, and we're very eager to embrace that. Other things, and I'll try to speed up here because I want Shawna to have plenty of time for her presentations. Because equity concerns are paramount in our minds on these issues, and we're very aware of all the effects that changes in NSF policies and practices can have on communities. We're trying to think through all the different ways that implementation of these policies may have either foreseen or unforeseen effects on the communities we serve, and trying to think through the ways that, any ways that we can mediate those sorts of things. The issue of shifting publication costs to research grants is something that certainly has been brought to our attention, and the likelihood of that and the effects that it would have on funding available to individual researchers. So we're trying to think through how anything that we can do to manage those sorts of impacts. There are we recognize non-trivial technical, cultural, and economic challenges surrounding data sharing. It's something that we intend to spend a lot of time listening to our communities, many different scientific communities that NSF serves, and to be responsive to the challenges in sharing data, but also to see anything that we can do to help foster improved access to data as a result of this memorandum. Finally, we recognize and think that one size doesn't fit all. There are different practices in place in different scientific communities about data sharing, and we want to be respectful and sensitive to all of the differences in the different communities that we serve. So let me just end by saying that we are listening. We're very interested in hearing what your interests in public access are, what your concerns are about changing public access requirements, the impacts that you anticipate for your communities, and any ideas that you have about the resources that your individual communities that you're parts of may need for compliance with these new standards for reporting and information sharing. And then finally, just how would you, we're interested in the question of how would you define success in this space as we go forward and move towards practices that increase levels of open science activity and information sharing. So with that, let me simply wrap up and say you can contact me and all the rest of us at NSF on these matters by simply writing to publicaccess@nsf.gov. We also have a website where we are sharing information about developments in this space. And as soon as the plan is released by the White House, we will be most likely making access to our new public access plan through this website as well. With that, let me thank you and turn this over to Shawna for the second part of this presentation.
Great. Thank you, Martin. That was fantastic. Everyone, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it. Dawn, I was surprised you looked into me a little bit and found out I was in Australia for a little while, and I'm based in Canada, so I haven't heard my Australian affiliation for a long time. So that was great to hear. So thank you, everybody. So, and great, Martin, you set a great context and gave us this great policy to consider and showing us, the movement and how things are changing in the direction they're going. And so with everyone in this audience, I think it's great that we need to, kind of think about the practicalities and what to prepare for. And as Martin said, the timeline, there's some time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We do have some time to prepare. So that's why we're hoping to introduce some of the persistent identifiers to you. And I'll talk specifically about ORCID today, but hopefully this will help everyone have a better sense of what's to come and how to best prepare for it. So again, that's me, that's my ORCID ID there. And so what I want to do is just give everybody a quick background about ORCID, just so you have a sense of it first and foremost. So I think what's really important is that ORCID is global, and we're research infrastructure. I like to call us the plumbing, we're the data plumbing. We're part of that around the world, and we are registered in the US. And so we just turned 10 years old in October, and I think we've got global participation with ORCID, global adoption across all disciplines. So we're quite pleased with that. For 10 years, that's been a massive adoption. And I think there was genuinely a problem to be solved, and ORCID, we're working really hard to do that. So I think our services are being adopted well. We are nonprofit and global. We have a board. We're community built, and we're governed by a board of directors that represent our member community. And as on a lighter note, ORCID, we try to keep our staff small, so that way we're effective and we're an agile organization. We have 37 staff located in 14 countries across 5 continents. So we do try to be global. And our most recent hire was in Zambia, Lambe. She's fantastic. So, okay, so ORCID is actually an acronym, and it stands for the Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. And we provide 3 main services. So first is the ORCID ID, and you can see it here. I've got it listed. So that's my ID at the bottom there, ending in 5034. So this ID is free to researchers. It's a unique, persistent 16-digit identifier that researchers own and control forever, that distinguishes and disambiguates them from every other researcher throughout their careers. So I'll go into that a little bit more later. Second, we provide a record, otherwise known as a research profile, to capture the researcher's research-related information. Some people like to consider it similar to LinkedIn, but for research. And then third, we provide APIs to enable the data exchange between ORCID's registry and local systems at universities, funders, publishers, and labs like yours. So here's an example from our fictional researcher, Sofia Maria Hernandez Garcia. Sophia went to our website and spent about a minute registering for her ORCID ID, and that's what the top of the screen you see for Sophia. Hers ends in 2427. So then you can see her profile, which over time she's either added data to herself, or organizations that Sophia approves can write data to her record for her, which is really handy. Now, any data that's written to Sophia's record, she can delete or change the visibility at any time. The record is always in full control by the researcher. Some of the other fields are employment, education, funding, and research outputs. We also include peer review. And just so you have a sense, there it is in the wild. Here's my ORCID record. And Martin, I haven't checked, but I'm assuming you have one too. All right, good. Okay, so why would a researcher want to get an ORCID ID? The original problem ORCID set out to solve was to enable researchers to distinguish themselves from each other. And there's actually a lot of researchers with the exact same name or similar. And to add to it, publishers will often publish names in really strange, unique formats that, I've only been published a few times, but my name's been printed or published 3 different ways. And I should get credit for those 3 publications. And so my ORCID ID is consistent across all those name variations that are attributed to me. So just over these past 10 years, ORCID, we've been working really closely with researchers, and we've come to understand these 6 benefits listed here on the right are some of the key values that researchers have expressed back to ORCID. They really appreciate that, ORCID recognizes their name, but they also have name flexibility because researchers change their names for a variety of reasons, but their ORCID ID will stay the same. And so they can add as many name variations as they like to their ORCID record. It doesn't matter to us. We're happy to support all name variations, and even languages in different scripts as well. So researchers can be known by all sorts of things. The researcher's always in control of this record, and they appreciate that they have the flexibility to change and update their record at their convenience. So I think we're often compared to Google Scholar, and I think if there was something in your Google Scholar record that you didn't like or you want changed, I think it would be really hard to go in and change. Thank goodness I haven't had to change anything in my Google Scholar record, but with ORCID, you just log in, change it yourself, and that's done. So there's not a lot of drama there. And then, of course, the profile stays with the researcher throughout their career. So no matter if they change institutions, research areas, doesn't matter. That's the same profile throughout their careers. And then, as I mentioned earlier, ORCID uptake has been global. Actually, we did a quick assessment, and we did see, as of last year, we now have people with ORCID IDs in every single country in the world. Last year, we were missing 3 really small islands, 2 in the South Pacific and 1 in the North Atlantic, but we got them. So we're really pleased. We can now say we're fully global. And then just so you have a sense of the adoption, in the US, we have just approximately 1 million people with ORCID IDs. Then second is Brazil, followed by China, Great Britain, India, Spain, and Germany. So just quickly stepping back and looking at the scholarly ecosystem, it's the researcher with their ORCID ID that's at the center of it all. And then the arrows represent data that is being exchanged between all the different stakeholders in the scholarly ecosystem. There are just under 4,000 systems that are connected to ORCID's registry that are reading, writing, and synchronizing data across that research ecosystem. And then just to have a sense of scale, there's about 85,000 active records per month and about 1.6 million records per year. So that means data is being updated, about 1.6 million records per year. So, and it's increasing every year. So we like to show you some of the big numbers. Okay, so if you don't already, it'd be great if you could register for your ORCID ID. So that's your persistent identifier for you as a person in the research ecosystem. Just go to our website at orcid.org. In the top right-hand corner, there's the register button, and it'll take you somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds. And if it takes you longer, let me know. And usually people say I'm a slow typer, so it takes a bit longer, but on average it's 30 to 60 seconds. So Martin talked about the Nelson Memo, and I'll get into that a little bit to make that connection. But in the Nelson Memo, it talks about persistent identifiers, which is great. And so ORCID, we are one of the major persistent identifier providers. And so as you've heard my spiel, we provide IDs for people. And so to qualify for an ORCID ID, you need to be a human being over the age of 18. So if you have people who are citizen scientists, or I was chatting with someone yesterday who is a patient researcher, if you've got different people in your community that are not technically professional researchers, they're welcome to get an ORCID ID, and they can be given credit for their contribution to the research, if you wanted to include their ORCID ID in the publications or in the funding application, they can be included. So that's the persistent identifier for ORCID. Now, our colleague organizations, Crossref is the other major organization. They provide persistent identifiers mostly for publications. So they work really closely with the publishing industry. So you see a lot of articles will now be published with the DOI with that persistent identifier. Now, Crossref is also starting to work with funding agencies, and they're starting to issue unique IDs for research grants. So of course I look at Martin and say, I think NSF's working with them too, right? Oh, fantastic. So we're getting there. We're all coordinating. And so with Crossref and ORCID, our infrastructures are connected. And so if you publish, when you submit your manuscript to a publisher and include the ORCID IDs in that submission, at the time of publication, hopefully that publisher publishes a DOI with Crossref. And then with your ORCID IDs, Crossref will recognize your ORCID IDs and write that citation to your ORCID record. And as a researcher, you'll be notified that there's been an addition to your record. But what's nice is you don't have to enter the data yourself. The data will flow straight from the publisher through the Crossref and ORCID infrastructure into your record. And then of course, next time you apply for an NSF award through ScienceCV, that data will just recycle into that form and you don't have to type in anything. Everyone's happier for it. Our other sibling organization is DataCite. As Martin mentioned earlier, data sets that underpin the research are really critical. And DataCite is the organization that issues DOIs, persistent identifiers, for data sets. And they're also starting to issue persistent identifiers for research instruments. There's also another organization called SciCrunch that does that as well. It's nice to have options. And so same thing with DataCite. If there's an ORCID ID assigned to that data set with the DataCite DOI, it will be written to your ORCID record too. So we're all trying to help each other out. That whole virtuous circle of recycling data is really what we're really aiming for. So just have a sense quickly of what it looks like in an ORCID record. So here's an example of a funder that wrote the award to an ORCID record, and you can see the source of this, and it identifies that this was written by that funder. And so someone who's reviewing the record can see, this person, we call that a trust marker. And so we can say, oh, okay, American Heart Association wrote this, so this person has been funded by American Heart. If the person wrote this data entry themselves, the source would be the name of the researcher. And so that way we have this sense of trust of the data. Or, if it is the person, there's a chance it's correct, but you might want to look into it a little bit more to validate and verify. Whereas when you see the source is the organization, then you can, someone reviewing this record probably doesn't have to consider that too much. Here's a quick example from a publisher. Again, you can see the source is that publisher. And then you can see that publisher did issue a DOI. And so that's included in that citation as well. And I just thought I'd show you a quick example of an employment. And so this is where a lot of organizations, maybe like your research labs, might want to write employment to your affiliated researchers' ORCID records. So you can see the example on the left was written by NYU. And the example on the right is the same person, but she entered the data herself. And so her name is the source of that employment. So many people here are wearing multiple hats. You're all researchers, but I think a lot of you are also administrators of research labs or facilities. So as an administrator, what you can do is have systems, administrative systems, that can keep a list of all your affiliated researchers. You can ask them all for their ORCID IDs, and you can write their employment details to their ORCID record. And now you've got a formal connection with their ORCID record. And your system can use ORCID's API to read and write data and synchronize. So if your researchers publish, and it's written to their ORCID record, we'll ping your system that's been affiliated with that record to say there's new data, would you like it? And then we can send that new citation to your system to update. So if you're trying to get a good sense of activity of what is happening at your lab and who's doing what in the publications, the funding that's coming in, this is another way that you can do it, is to optimize it with the persistent identifiers. Okay, so quickly, I know Martin covered the Nelson Memo really well. So there's a good screenshot of it. Now, when you want to look into persistent identifiers specifically, go down to section 4. And that's really, and Martin used the word dense, and I thought that was so great. This is a very dense memo. Sometimes you have to read every sentence 3 times to make sure you get everything in that sentence. So make sure you've got tea or coffee with you and some snacks. And so go through this section. It will talk about, really the goal, the vision is to have thorough persistent identifiers so that all publications, data sets, people all have IDs, PIDs assigned to them, and that that our data is structured to capture and to give credit to the right people, to the right objects. We're capturing that in the theme of research integrity, right? We want to be able to really have that strong research ecosystem that's structured properly, is reliable, so we can do that reproducibility. And gosh, you know what? This year, the White House declared the year of open science, right? It's so exciting. And this is one of the ways that we actually enable open science, is by assigning PIDs so you can access things reliably. And that's such, unfortunately, in the 21st century, it's still hard. we still run into some 404 errors, don't we? It's exhausting. So that's really important. I'll quickly mention section 4B here. It's a little cryptic. It says persistent identifiers for researchers as per NSPM 33, which is a presidential memo from a few years ago. But in that, I think the default has been ORCID. ORCID is the only organization that can meet all the criteria that was listed in that previous memo. So what's happening now, thank goodness, and Martin, you're part of this, is that the federal agencies are starting to develop clear policies that are not so cryptic. And they've been coming out clearly identifying ORCID as the persistent identifier for researchers. That's part of their policy. And I almost fell off my chair last week when DOD announced ORCID specifically. And I thought, oh, thank goodness. So we got DOD, EPA, NASA. NASA's policy just came out recently. NIH has articulated ORCID. Their policy is coming out soon. As Martin mentioned, the White House is reviewing policies, and we're waiting for that stamp of approval. And so NSF is in that same, but NSF announced ORCID, gosh, almost 6 months ago now. Hey, Martin. So we are getting there. And then I just wanted to end with this slide, just because I recognize most people in this audience do have multiple hats. You're researchers, you're research administrators for maybe one lab facility, specific research instruments, maybe multiple. So I think you've got various opportunities in your roles to activate persistent identifiers and how to use them as a researcher. Make sure you get one, use it when you're applying for funding, when you're submitting manuscript, and then as an administrator, is this the kind of data that you would like to collect internally and then also to share, to enable your researchers at your facility to start using persistent identifiers as part of their workflows with your organization. And I've got a whole nother thing on research resources and research instruments, but I'm going to spare you all from that today because I think there's so many exciting things happening. So here's my email address. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I share this, although nobody does, so please feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate. And Martin, do you think it's a good time for questions now?
Thank you very much, Martin and Shawna. This was great hearing this reiterated and taking us through the memo, which is easy. Yeah, not light reading. So
thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having us.